While buying a jewel for his wife, the millionaire was left paralyzed when he saw the saleswoman's pendant. It was the same one he had given to his daughter before she disappeared 18 years ago. Daniel Mitchell stood in the doorway of a room he had not entered in years. Dust floated in the dim sunlight filtering through heavy curtains, casting long shadows on the faded wallpaper. This was Hannah's room, untouched since the day she vanished. Her favorite stuffed animals still sat in a neat row on the bed, and a silver-framed picture of her smiling face rested on the nightstand. She had been 7, innocent, full of life. A sharp ache gripped Daniel's chest. He had tried so hard to keep everything together, to push through the endless pain that grew heavier with each passing year. But the truth was, a part of him had died the day Hannah was taken. He could still hear her laughter, the sound of her tiny feet running down the halls. Now, only silence remained, a deep, suffocating silence that swallowed the entire house. Abigail would have known what to do. His first wife had always been the strong one, the anchor that held everything in place. But she was gone too, lost to complications during childbirth when Hannah was born. The cruel irony of it all, Abigail had given her life to bring Hannah into the world, only for the world to rip Hannah away years later. Daniel walked further into the room, running his fingers over the dusty dresser. Hannah's schoolbooks were still stacked neatly, as if she might return at any moment to finish her homework. It was a foolish hope, but it was one he could never truly let go of. For nearly 2 decades, he had clung to the belief that Hannah was out there somewhere, alive, waiting for him to find her. He had spared no expense, hiring private investigators, working with law enforcement, making desperate public appeals. But every lead eventually ran cold, leaving him with nothing but a faint glimmer of hope and an unbearable sense of regret. After Abigail's death, Daniel had drowned himself in work, building his empire, expanding his wealth, making deal after deal. It was the only way to numb the pain, to escape the gaping hole in his life. And then there was Claire. She was charming, graceful, and for a while, she made him feel alive again. When they married, he thought it was a fresh start, a chance to build something new. But the happiness was fleeting. No matter how much he tried, the shadow of Hannah's disappearance loomed over them, the unanswered questions, the empty spaces. Claire had been patient in the beginning, offering support as best she could, but over time, the search for Hannah became a wedge between them. With every dead end, every lead that went nowhere, the distance between them grew wider. Daniel could see it in Claire's eyes, the exhaustion of living under the weight of a ghost. With a heavy heart, he turned away from the room and stepped out, shutting the door behind him. He knew he had to move forward, to stop letting the past consume him. But each time he considered giving up, something pulled him back. Today was Claire's birthday, and Daniel had promised to take her shopping, a small distraction from the endless grief. They were headed to Los Angeles, a city Claire adored for its high-end boutiques and vibrant energy. Daniel was not particularly thrilled about the trip, but he knew it mattered to her. He had even planned a surprise, a beautiful piece of jewelry. It was the least he could do for the woman who had stood by his side, even as their marriage strained under the weight of his sorrow. One last glance at Hannah's door, and then he forced himself to move forward. Downstairs, Claire was already waiting, radiant as ever. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Ready to go?" she asked, though he detected the faintest trace of impatience in her voice. Daniel nodded and offered a small smile. "Yeah, let's go." The first half of the drive was quiet. Claire chatted about an upcoming dinner party, but Daniel barely listened. His mind kept drifting back to that room, to Hannah's bright eyes and laughter, to the life he had lost. When they finally arrived in the city, Claire's excitement was contagious. She loved Los Angeles, the luxury stores, the thrill of finding something new. Daniel, on the other hand, found it overwhelming. But today was not about him. As they strolled down Rodeo Drive, Claire flitted in and out of stores, trying on dresses, admiring shoes. Daniel followed along, his thoughts elsewhere. Even after all these years, his eyes scanned the crowds instinctively, as though he might catch a glimpse of Hannah. After what felt like hours, They stopped in front of an upscale jewelry store. "I think I will go in here," Claire said, her eyes gleaming as she admired the glittering display. Daniel nodded and followed her inside. The store was elegant, plush carpets, polished counters, the scent of expensive perfume hanging in the air. It was the kind of place where a single necklace could cost as much as a car. He never cared for extravagance, but Claire loved it, and that was what mattered. As they stepped inside, something caught his eye, something that made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman stood behind the counter, helping a customer. Around her neck hung a small, delicate pendant. Daniel's heart pounded. It was the exact same pendant he had given Hannah all those years ago. His world seemed to slow. The pendant, with its delicate chain and tiny sapphire stone in the center, was unmistakable. He could still remember placing it around Hannah's neck, the way her little fingers had reached up to touch the cool metal, her face lighting up with joy. "Daniel?" Claire's voice cut into his thoughts. She was standing nearby, admiring a set of diamond earrings. "What do you think of these?" He barely heard her. "Yeah, they are nice," he mumbled, his focus still locked on the saleswoman. His heart raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. It could not be a coincidence. Could it? There had to be thousands of similar pendants in the world. And yet, the way the small stone caught the light sent a wave of emotion crashing over him. "I will be right back," he muttered, already moving toward the counter. He heard Claire calling after him, but the sound faded into the background as he approached the young woman. His palms were slick with sweat, his throat dry. Up close, he could see her more clearly. There was something about her face, a familiarity he could not shake. Was it her eyes? The curve of her jawline? His thoughts swirled, a dizzying mix of hope and fear. Finally, she turned to him, offering a polite, professional smile. "Can I help you, sir?" Her voice was calm and polite, but there was a warmth to it that caught him off guard. Daniel hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start. His eyes flicked to the pendant again. "That necklace," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "Where did you get it?" The saleswoman glanced down at the pendant as if noticing it for the first time. Her fingers instinctively brushed over the sapphire. "Oh, this? It was a gift from my mother." Daniel's breath itched. "Your mother?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. She nodded. "Yeah. It is one of the only things I have from her. She gave it to me when I was little." "Why do you ask?" Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. He opened his mouth to respond, but his words faltered. How could he explain? How could he even ask the questions forming in his mind without sounding insane? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I used to know someone who had a necklace just like that," he finally said, carefully choosing his words. "It is very rare." The young woman smiled softly, though there was a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion, maybe. "Yeah, I have never seen another one like it. My mom always said it was special. It is the only piece of jewelry I wear." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had to know more, but he could not just come out and ask if she was Hannah. If this woman standing in front of him after all these years could possibly be his daughter. He needed answers, but he had to tread carefully. "What is your name?" he asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart was pounding. "Emma Matthews," she replied. "Emma. Not Hannah." Daniel swallowed hard, the initial wave of hope dampened by the reality of her name. But names could be changed. The thought lingered, growing stronger by the second. "Emma Matthews," he repeated quietly. "That is a beautiful name." He forced a smile, his mind working in overdrive. Who was this woman? And why did she have Hannah's necklace? He needed to know more. He needed to dig deeper. Before he could ask another question, Claire appeared at his side, her eyes moving between him and Emma with a curious expression. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked, a slight edge to her voice. "Did you find something you like?" Daniel blinked, momentarily thrown off. "No, not yet," he stammered, still trying to focus on Emma. I was just talking to the young lady about her necklace. Claire gave a small laugh, clearly confused by his sudden interest in jewelry. You are really getting into this, are you not? She turned to Emma, offering her a polite smile. He is not usually the jewelry type. Emma returned the smile, but Daniel sensed her growing unease. The moment was slipping away, and he still did not have the answers he needed. Do you work here every day? Daniel asked, his voice slightly strained, as if clinging to a lifeline. I mean, in case I want to come back, for the necklace. Emma looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. Yeah, I am here most days, she said slowly, her gaze flicking between him and Claire. There was something cautious in her expression now, as if she could sense the weight behind his words, though she did not understand it. Daniel nodded, forcing himself to step back. He could not push too hard, not yet, but he had to know more. We will be back, he said, more to himself than anyone else. He barely registered Claire's amused expression as they left the store, his mind still reeling from the encounter. The pendant. Emma. There was no way this was a coincidence. As they walked back down the street, Claire continued to chat about the earrings she wanted, but Daniel was miles away, his thoughts consumed by possibilities, each one more wild and far-fetched than the last. Could it be her? Could this young woman be the daughter he had lost all those years ago? The thought consumed him, pulling him deeper into a whirlwind of emotions, hope, fear, disbelief. He needed to know more about Emma Matthews. He needed to know if she was truly Hannah. And he was not going to stop until he had the answers. Daniel's mind raced as they drove home from the city. Claire was talking, her voice floating in the background, but he barely heard a word. His thoughts were consumed by the image of Emma in the jewelry store, the way her fingers had instinctively touched the pendant, the same pendant he had given to Hannah. Could it really be her? Could his daughter, who had vanished nearly 2 decades ago, have been standing right in front of him? By the time they pulled into the driveway, Daniel had made up his mind. He was not going to let this rest. The answers were too close, he could feel it. He needed to know who Emma really was, and why she had Hannah's necklace. Later that evening, after Claire had gone to bed, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the family photos that lined his desk. There were pictures of him and Abigail smiling on their wedding day, their arms wrapped around each other. There was Hannah, in one of her last school photos, grinning with 2 missing teeth. His eyes lingered on her face, the same hopeful, innocent expression she always had. He had spent years searching for her. At first, the police had been optimistic. They thought she had been taken by someone close by, that a neighbor or a family friend might have known something. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the trail went cold. After a year, the authorities had all but given up. But Daniel never did. He had hired private investigators, spent a fortune on the search, but nothing had come of it. Hannah was gone, and with her, part of Daniel's soul. Now there was hope. And with that hope came the need for action. Daniel picked up the phone and called an old contact, Paul Mitchell, a private investigator he had worked with in the past. Paul had a reputation for being discreet, thorough, and relentless. If anyone could dig up information on Emma Matthews, it was him. The phone rang twice before Paul answered, his voice low and gravelly. Daniel Mitchell. It has been a long time. Too long, Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I need your help again, Paul. It is about Hannah. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I thought we had exhausted every lead. I found something. Someone, Daniel said, his words rushing out. A young woman. She has the same pendant I gave Hannah before she disappeared. I think she might be my daughter. Daniel's accusation hung heavy in the air, suffocating the space between them. Claire's face crumpled, her carefully constructed facade finally breaking apart. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at him, her voice trembling. I did not want to hurt you, she whispered. I never meant for it to go this far. Daniel felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. The truth was out, but instead of relief, it crushed him. He had loved this woman, trusted her, and she had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Why? He asked, his voice raw with emotion. Why would you do this to me? To her? Claire's lips quivered as tears streamed down her cheeks. I was jealous, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought if she was gone, you would focus on me, on us. I was afraid you would never love me the way you loved Abigail and Hannah. I wanted you all to myself, Daniel. I wanted us to have a life without the shadow of your past hanging over us. Daniel stared at her in sheer disbelief. You destroyed my life, he said, his voice trembling. You took my daughter away from me. Do you even understand what you have done? Claire sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I am sorry, she cried. I am so sorry. I thought it would be better this way. I thought you would be happier without her. I did not realize how much it would hurt you. Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he fought to control the storm raging inside him. You had no right, he said, his voice cold and hard. No right to make that decision for me. You took my daughter's life away, and you took my chance to be her father. How could you? Claire looked up at him, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. Daniel, please, she begged. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix this. We can still be a family. We can. No, Daniel said sharply, cutting her off. There is no fixing this. You have ruined everything. I will never forgive you for what you have done. Claire let out a shuddering sob, sinking back into her chair, defeated. I am sorry, she whispered again, but Daniel was no longer listening. He turned and walked out of the dining room, his heart pounding. He could not be in the same room as her for another second. The woman he had trusted with his heart, with his life, had destroyed everything. Stepping outside, the cool night air hit his face, grounding him. His mind spun with anger, grief, and disbelief. He had finally found Hannah, but the truth had come at a price he was not sure he could bear. Claire had taken everything from him, but now, at least, he had Hannah. And he would not let anything or anyone take her away from him again. Daniel spent the rest of the night in a haze of anger and shock. He replayed the conversation with Claire over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. His heart felt like it had been shattered all over again, first by the loss of his daughter, and now by the betrayal of the woman he thought he could trust. He hardly slept, pacing the house in the dead of night, lost in a swirl of emotions. By dawn, one thing was clear. He had to see Hannah. He needed to talk to her, to explain everything, to finally tell her the truth. But how? How could he tell her that her entire life had been built on lies? He had no idea how she would react, but he knew he could not wait any longer. Daniel showered and dressed quickly, his mind racing with thoughts of what he would say. As he headed toward the door, Claire appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and tear-streaked. Daniel, she called softly, her voice fragile. Please let us talk. I was wrong. I will fix this. I promise. Please do not do this. Daniel did not even look up at her. He could not. The sight of her made his stomach turn. There is nothing left to say, Claire, he said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. You have done enough damage. Without waiting for a response, he stepped out the door and into his car. He could not bear another second in that house. The drive to the jewelry store was a blur. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. What if Hannah did not believe him? What if she thought he was crazy? Worse, what if she wanted nothing to do with him? The thought sent a jolt of fear through him, but he pushed it down. He had to try. He owed her the truth. When he arrived at the store, Daniel sat in his car for a moment, gathering his thoughts. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for all these years. He took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the store was quiet, and there she was, Emma, or rather, Hannah, standing behind the counter, organizing jewelry displays. The sight of her made Daniel's heart clench. She looked so much like Abigail, with the same soft features, the same determined expression. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he did not know how to move. Finally, he found his voice. Emma. She looked up, surprised to see him again so soon. Oh, hi, she said with a polite smile. Did you need something else? Daniel swallowed hard, his pulse racing. This was it. There was no going back now. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. It is about who you are. Emma blinked, clearly confused. Who I am? Yes, Daniel said, stepping closer to the counter. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, and it pained him to know what he was about to tell her. Emma, or rather, Hannah, I believe you are my daughter. Emma's polite smile faded, replaced by a deep frown. She stared at him, as if waiting for him to say it was a joke. But when the silence stretched on, her expression hardened. Excuse me? Daniel's throat tightened. He knew it sounded insane, but he had to make her understand. I believe you are Hannah Mitchell. My daughter. You disappeared when you were 7 years old. I have been looking for you ever since. Emma's face went pale. She took a step back, gripping the counter behind her as if needing the support. I think you have made a mistake, she said quickly, shaking her head. I am not Hannah. My name is Emma Matthews. I do not know what you are talking about. Daniel's heart sank, but he pressed on. I know this is a lot to take in, but I have proof. The necklace, the pendant you are wearing, it is the same one I gave to my daughter before she disappeared. I have spent years searching for her, for you. Emma's eyes widened, and she instinctively touched the pendant around her neck. This was a gift from my mother, she said, her voice trembling. My adopted mother. Daniel took a step closer, his eyes pleading. I know. Your adopted parents found you when you were 7, just outside of a small town. You had no memory of where you came from. No memory of your past. They gave you a new name. But you are Hannah, I am your father. Emma stared at him, her breath coming in short, quick bursts. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That cannot be true. You do not even know me. I do, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I have been searching for you for 18 years. I never gave up. I hired investigators. Spent everything I had trying to find you. And now I have. I know it is hard to believe, but I swear to you, Emma, Hannah, you are my daughter. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she took another step back as if trying to put distance between them. I do not understand, she whispered. I do not remember. I do not remember anything. Daniel's heart broke at the sight of her distress, but he could not stop now. It is not your fault, he said gently. You were taken from me. You were too young to remember, but I am telling you the truth. You are Hannah Mitchell. Emma's hands trembled as she gripped the pendant tightly, her mind spinning. If this is true, she whispered, barely able to form the words, then why did you not find me sooner? Why did it take this long? Daniel's chest tightened. How could he explain the years of searching? The dead ends? The hopelessness that had consumed him for so long? I tried, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I did everything I could. But someone made sure you were hidden. Made sure I could not find you. Emma's tear-filled eyes met his, confusion and fear clouding her expression. Who? Daniel hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Claire, he said quietly. Your stepmother. She was the one who sent you away. Emma stared at him, frozen in disbelief. What? She did it out of jealousy, Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She did not want you to be part of our lives. She wanted me all to herself. So she made you disappear. Emma shook her head, her tears spilling over. No, no. That cannot be true. My mother would never. I know it is hard to hear, Daniel said softly, reaching out to her. But it is the truth. And I am so sorry, Hannah. I am so sorry for everything. Emma backed away, her hands trembling as she clutched the pendant. Her mind was reeling. Her world was unraveling. "I need to go," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Hannah, wait." Daniel reached out, but she turned and rushed out of the store, leaving him standing there, devastated. Emma rushed down the busy street, her mind spinning, her heart racing. She did not know where she was going, she just knew she needed to get away. The words Daniel had said kept echoing in her head. "You are my daughter, Hannah Mitchell." It did not make sense. Her entire life, she had been Emma Matthews, the adopted daughter of a loving couple who had saved her from a past she could not remember. And now this man, this stranger, was telling her that everything she knew was a lie. She could still feel the pendant against her chest, the one she had worn for as long as she could remember. Her adopted mother had given it to her, telling her it was a special piece from her childhood. Emma had never questioned it. Why would she? She had always assumed her past was a mystery she would never solve. But now she was not so sure. After what felt like hours of wandering aimlessly, Emma found herself sitting on a bench in a quiet park. Her mind was a chaotic mess, filled with questions she had no answers to. She touched the pendant again, running her fingers over the smooth surface as if it held the key to her past. Could what Daniel said really be true? Could she be Hannah Mitchell, the daughter of a man she did not remember? Her thoughts drifted back to her adopted parents, the ones who had taken her in when she was just a child. They had always been kind and loving, never pressuring her to remember anything from before they found her. In fact, they had been cautious about discussing her past at all. They told her only what little they knew, that she had been found wandering outside a small town, alone and confused, with no memory of who she was or where she had come from. Emma had accepted that story for years. She had made peace with the idea that her early childhood was lost to her, buried in some part of her mind she could never reach. But now, that peace was shattered. If what Daniel said was true, then her life, her very identity, had been stolen from her. And the person responsible was the woman who had been her stepmother, a woman she did not even remember. The thought made her stomach churn. How could someone be so cruel? How could anyone take a child away from their family, from the father who had been searching for her all these years? Emma did not want to believe it, but the more she thought about it, the more things started to make sense. There had always been a part of her that felt disconnected, as if something was missing, a piece of herself she could not quite grasp. She let out a shaky breath and pulled out her phone. She needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to her. Emma stood on the doorstep of her parents' house, her heart pounding in her chest. She had not been here in weeks, not since she had moved out to live on her own. But now, standing in front of the familiar door, the place that had always felt like home, she felt a surge of uncertainty. What if they had not told her the whole truth? What if there was more to her past than they had let on? The door opened, and her mother, Margaret Matthews, stood there, smiling warmly as always. "Emma?" she exclaimed, wrapping her in a tight hug. "It is so good to see you, honey. We have missed you." Emma hugged her back, but her mind was elsewhere. She pulled away, trying to muster the courage to ask the questions that had been burning inside her all day. "Mom, can we talk?" Margaret's smile faded slightly, her brow furrowing with concern. Margaret's smile faded slightly, her brow furrowing with concern. "Of course, sweetie. Is everything all right?" Emma nodded, though she did not feel all right at all. "Yeah, I need to ask you something. It is about where I came from, before you and Dad adopted me." Margaret's face paled, and Emma could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Why are you asking about that now?" she asked softly, leading Emma into the living room. "I thought we had settled all that years ago." "I know, Mom," Emma said quickly, sitting down on the couch. "But something happened today. Someone told me something, and now I do not know what to think." Margaret sat down beside her, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "What did they tell you?" Emma took a deep breath, her fingers instinctively reaching for the pendant again. A man came to the store today. His name is Daniel Mitchell. He says that I am his daughter. That I am Hannah Mitchell. And that I was taken from him when I was 7. Margaret's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she did not say anything. Emma watched her carefully, waiting for her to deny it, to tell her that it was all a mistake. But Margaret did not speak. She just sat there, her face drained of color, her hands trembling slightly. Mom? Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Is it true? Margaret's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet Emma's gaze. Oh, Emma, she whispered. I did not think you would ever find out. Emma's heart sank. So it is true? Margaret nodded slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. We did not know who you were when we found you. You were just a little girl, all alone, wandering by the side of the road. You did not remember anything, your name, where you came from, nothing. We took you in, and we loved you as our own. But we always knew there was a chance that your real family might come looking for you. Emma's chest tightened as the weight of her mother's words settled over her. Why did you not tell me? She asked, her voice shaking with emotion. Why did you never tell me the truth? Margaret wiped at her tears, her face filled with guilt. We did not want to scare you. You were so young, and we thought it would be better if you did not remember. We did not know who your parents were, or if they would ever come back. We just wanted you to feel safe. Emma stood up, her emotions boiling over. But I had a family, she cried, her voice breaking. I had a father who has been searching for me all these years, and you never told me. Margaret stood as well, reaching out to her. Emma, please. I am not Emma, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. I am Hannah. My name is Hannah Mitchell, and you have been lying to me my whole life. Margaret's face crumpled, and she sank back onto the couch, sobbing. I am sorry, she whispered. I am so sorry. We never meant to hurt you. We just wanted to give you a home. Emma wiped at her tears, her heart aching with a mix of anger, confusion, and sadness. She had always loved her adopted parents. They had given her a good life, a safe life. But now, everything she thought she knew about herself, about her past, had been shattered. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the house, her mind racing with the revelation that her life had been built on a foundation of lies. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his office, staring at the photograph of Hannah that Paul had sent him just days before. His heart ached as he thought about the whirlwind of emotions that had unfolded. Hannah, his daughter, was alive, but now, he had torn her world apart with the truth. He had been so eager to reunite with her, but in the process, he had shattered the life she thought she knew. But there was something else that gnawed at him. The betrayal. Claire's betrayal. It ate at him, a festering wound that refused to heal. She had orchestrated Hannah's disappearance. And now that the truth was out, he had to confront her once more. He could not wait any longer. He needed to hear Claire admit everything. This time, he would not let her deflect or play innocent. He would get the full truth out of her. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stood and walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy as he approached the master bedroom. He found Claire sitting at the vanity, brushing her hair absent-mindedly. She glanced up at him through the mirror as he entered, her expression unreadable. Daniel, she said softly, her voice careful. What is wrong? He closed the door behind him and stood by the foot of the bed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. We need to talk. Claire turned to face him, setting down her hairbrush. What about? She asked, though there was a hint of weariness in her tone. You know exactly what about, Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. Hannah. Claire's face paled slightly, but she held his gaze. I already told you. I did not mean for it to go this far. I thought it was what you needed. What we needed. Daniel's jaw tightened. What we needed? You are telling me you thought tearing my daughter away from me was for my own good? For our good? Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she stood up, walking toward him. Daniel, please, I never wanted to hurt you. You did not want to hurt me? Daniel's voice rose, his anger bubbling to the surface. You tore my life apart. You took away the one thing that mattered to me more than anything in this world. And you think saying you did not mean to hurt me makes it better? Claire flinched but did not back down. I was desperate, she said, her voice shaking. I thought if she was gone, we could have a fresh start. You could finally move on. We could finally be a real family without you constantly looking for a ghost. A ghost? Daniel's voice was cold. She was my daughter, Claire. Not a ghost. She was my flesh and blood. And you took her from me. For what? Because you were jealous? Tears streamed down Claire's face as she shook her head. I was scared, she whispered. I was afraid I would never be enough for you. I saw how much you still loved Abigail, how much Hannah reminded you of her. I thought I was losing you. So I did what I thought I had to do. Daniel's chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. You sent a child away to protect yourself? A child, Claire? Do you even realize what you have done? I do, she sobbed, collapsing onto the bed. I know I ruined everything. I know I can never undo what I did. But Daniel, I love you. I did this because I loved you. Daniel stared at her, his heart aching with deep, bitter sadness. Daniel shook his head, his jaw tightening as he stared at the woman he once trusted. If you loved me, you never would have taken her away from me. You never would have let me suffer all these years, thinking she was gone forever. Claire looked up at him, her face wet with tears. What can I do? How can I make this right? You cannot, Daniel said quietly, his voice hardening. It is too late for that. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Claire's muffled sobs. But Daniel felt no pity, no sympathy for her. He had trusted her, and she had betrayed him in the worst possible way. There was no coming back from this. After a long pause, Daniel took a step back toward the door. I am filing for divorce, he said flatly. And you can be sure that I will make sure everyone knows what you did. Claire's eyes widened in panic. No, Daniel, please. It is over, Claire, he said, his voice cold and final. You have destroyed everything. With that, Daniel turned and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. The house felt suffocating, filled with the ghosts of his past mistakes and betrayals. He needed to get out, needed air. Daniel found himself driving without any clear destination, the city lights blurring past him as he gripped the steering wheel. His thoughts tangled. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. His marriage was over. His relationship with Hannah was in pieces. And he was left with the overwhelming weight of everything Claire had done. But despite all the pain, there was one thing that kept him going: Hannah. He had found her after all these years. She might not remember him yet, but she was still his daughter. And he was not going to let her slip away again. Pulling over to the side of the road, Daniel took out his phone and dialed Paul's number. The private investigator answered after a few rings, his voice gruff. Daniel, I need your help, Daniel said, his voice steady. There is still more to this. I need to know why Claire did what she did. And I need to find out who else was involved. Paul let out a sigh. Are you sure you want to keep digging? I am sure, Daniel replied. There is more to this, Paul. I can feel it. Claire did not act alone. I need to know everything. All right, Paul said. I will see what I can find. Daniel hung up the phone and leaned back in his seat, the weight of the last few days pressing down on him. He had come so far, found Hannah, uncovered Claire's betrayal. But there were still too many unanswered questions, and he was not going to stop until he had every single one of them. His mind drifted back to Hannah, his daughter, lost and found again. He did not know how he was going to fix things with her, how he could even begin to repair the damage that had been done. But he would. He had to. Taking a deep breath, Daniel started the car and headed back home. He had a long road ahead of him, but he was not alone anymore. He had Hannah. And no matter what happened next, he was going to fight for her. Daniel sat in his office, fingers drumming on the desk as he waited for Paul's call. Every minute felt like an eternity, as the unanswered questions gnawed at him. He knew there had to be more to the story. Claire could not have orchestrated something so elaborate on her own. But who else had been involved? And why? He needed closure, not just for himself, but for Hannah. The phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and Daniel quickly picked it up. "Paul, what did you find?" Paul's voice was steady on the other end of the line. "You were right, Daniel. There is more to this than just Claire." Daniel's stomach tightened. He had expected this, but hearing it out loud made the betrayal feel even deeper. Who else was involved? "I did some digging into Claire's background," Paul began. "Turns out she was not acting alone. There was someone helping her, someone who had a vested interest in keeping Hannah out of the picture." Daniel's heart pounded as he waited for Paul to continue. "Claire was working with a man named David Hale," Paul explained. "He is a lawyer, but he has also been involved in some pretty shady dealings over the years, mostly with people trying to hide assets or manipulate inheritances." Daniel's mind raced. David Hale, the name sounds familiar. Why would she work with him? Paul hesitated for a moment. Because she wanted to make sure that Hannah never came back to claim what was rightfully hers. From what I have found, Hale helped Claire set up the whole operation, making sure Hannah disappeared and could not be traced back to you. Daniel felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. Claire had not just taken his daughter away out of jealousy. She had done it to control his fortune, to make sure that Hannah would not inherit anything. She had been manipulating him for years, playing on his grief, while working behind the scenes to secure her own position. "Where is Hale now?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. "That is the thing," Paul said. "He has been off the radar for a while, but I have got some leads. I am tracking him down as we speak." Daniel clenched his jaw. "I want to talk to him. I want answers." "You will get them," Paul assured him. "But you need to be careful. This guy is slippery. He knows how to cover his tracks." "I do not care how slippery he is," Daniel said, his voice hard. "I am going to find him, and I am going to make sure he pays for what he did." After the call ended, Daniel sat in silence, his thoughts racing. Claire's betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. It was not just about jealousy. It was about power, control, and money. She had taken Hannah away to protect her own interests, all while pretending to support him through his grief. But now, the truth was coming to light, and Daniel was not going to rest until everyone involved was held accountable. Meanwhile, Hannah sat alone in her small apartment, her mind still reeling from the conversation with her adoptive mother. The words echoed in her head over and over. "We did not know who you were when we found you." She had always assumed she would never know where she came from, that her past would remain a mystery. But now, everything had changed. The pendant around her neck felt heavier than ever, like a reminder of a life she did not remember. She turned it over in her fingers, staring at the tiny sapphire stone that had been a constant in her life. Daniel's words haunted her. Could she really be Hannah Mitchell? Could this man who claimed to be her father be telling the truth? Part of her wanted to believe him. The look in his eyes when he had spoken to her had been filled with so much emotion, so much pain. It was clear he believed every word he had said. But how could she trust someone she did not even know? How could she accept that her entire life had been built on lies? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her adoptive mother, Margaret. Hannah hesitated for a moment before answering. Margaret's voice was shaky. Hannah, I am so sorry." Hannah's throat tightened. "Why did you never tell me the truth? Why did you not tell me I had a family out there looking for me?" "I wanted to," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "But we did not know. We did not know who you really were until that man came to the store. We only knew you as the little girl we found, and we loved you. We did not want to lose you." Hannah closed her eyes, her emotions warring inside her. "But you did lose me," she said quietly. "You lost me the moment you did not tell me the truth." There was silence on the other end of the line, and Hannah knew her words had hit hard. But she could not help how she felt. She had spent her entire life feeling like something was missing, and now she knew why. "I am sorry," Margaret whispered again. "I wish we had handled things differently." Hannah did not know what to say. She had loved her adoptive parents, but now everything felt tainted. She did not know who she was anymore. She was not Emma Matthews. She was Hannah Mitchell, the daughter of a man who had been searching for her for 18 years. "I need time to figure this out," Hannah said softly. I need time." "I understand," Margaret said quietly. "Take all the time you need. We will always be here for you." Hannah hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. She did not know where to go from here. Her life had been turned upside down, and she was not sure how to put the pieces back together. Later that evening, Daniel sat in the living room, staring into the fireplace. The house was quiet, but the silence felt heavy. Claire was gone, her belongings packed and moved out, leaving behind an emptiness that matched the one inside him. The doorbell rang, pulling him from his thoughts. He was not expecting anyone. But when he opened the door, his heart skipped a beat. Hannah stood there, her face pale, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I did not know where else to go," she said quietly, her voice trembling. Daniel felt a wave of emotions crash over him: relief, hope, fear. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "I am glad you came," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Hannah hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. She stood in the middle of the living room, looking around as if trying to piece together the fragments of a life she did not remember. "I do not know what to believe," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I do not know who I am anymore." Daniel's heart broke at the sound of her words. He wanted to reach out, to tell her everything would be okay, but he knew this was something she needed to work through on her own. "You are Hannah," he said gently. "You are my daughter. And I will be here for you, no matter what." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, struggling to keep her emotions in check. "I do not remember anything," she whispered. "I do not remember you. I do not remember my life before." Daniel stepped closer, his voice soft but filled with emotion. "That is okay," he said. "You do not have to remember everything right now. We have time. We can figure this out together." For a moment, Hannah said nothing, her gaze fixed on the floor. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I do not know where to start." Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. "We will start wherever you want," he said. "We will take it one step at a time." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and fear. "What if I never remember?" Daniel swallowed hard, his voice steady. "Then we will build new memories." The days that followed were slow, filled with uncertainty but also with cautious hope. Hannah had moved into a small guest room at Daniel's house, though she still kept some distance. It was clear that she was trying to process everything that had been revealed to her, the truth about her past, the lies she had lived, and the father who was now a stranger to her. Daniel did not push. He gave her space, but he made sure she knew that he was there for her. Each morning, they would sit together over breakfast, exchanging small talk about nothing important. It was awkward at first, both of them unsure how to bridge the enormous gap between them. But slowly, day by day, they began to feel a little more comfortable. Daniel tried his best to be patient. He knew that for Hannah, this was not just about reconnecting with him. It was about rediscovering herself. She was grappling with an identity crisis, caught between the life she had known and the truth that had been hidden from her. He could see the struggle in her eyes every time they spoke, the confusion that seemed to weigh her down. One morning, as they sat together at the dining table, Hannah finally broke the silence. "Do you ever think about Mom?" she asked, her voice soft and tentative, as if she was not sure if it was okay to ask. Daniel felt his heart tighten at the mention of Abigail. "Every day," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "She was the love of my life. Losing her was the hardest thing I have ever been through." Hannah nodded, her gaze distant. I do not remember her. I wish I did. Daniel looked at her, his heart aching for all that she had lost. She was kind, he said gently. And strong. You remind me of her in so many ways. Hannah's eyes filled with unshed tears, and she looked away, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It is strange, she whispered. I have always felt like something was missing in my life, like there was this big empty space that I could not explain. And now I know why. But it does not make it any easier. Daniel reached out, placing his hand gently over hers. I know this is hard, he said softly. And I do not expect everything to be okay right away. But I am here. Whatever you need, we will figure it out together. Hannah looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty but also with a flicker of hope. I want to know more, she said quietly. About you, about her, about our life before. Daniel felt a swell of emotion. This was the first real sign that Hannah wanted to reconnect, to understand the life she had been torn from. He nodded, his voice steady. I will tell you everything. That evening, Daniel brought out a box of old family photos, ones that he had kept stored away for years. He and Hannah sat on the living room floor, sifting through the pictures together. For Daniel, it was like opening a time capsule, so many memories of a life that had been lost to him for nearly 2 decades. This was our house, Daniel said, holding up a photo of a beautiful colonial-style home surrounded by trees. We lived there before everything happened. Hannah studied the picture, her brow furrowing as she tried to make sense of the past she did not remember. It looks familiar, she murmured, though her voice was uncertain. Daniel smiled gently, his voice filled with warmth. You used to love playing in the backyard. There was this big oak tree, and you would spend hours climbing it, even though your mom was always worried you would fall. Hannah's lips twitched into a small smile. Sounds like something I would do. Daniel laughed softly, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. This was the first time they had really shared something, a memory, even if it was one that Hannah could not fully recall. As they continued to look through the photos, Daniel told her stories about her childhood, little things, like her favorite toys, the songs she loved to sing, and the way she used to follow him around the house, asking endless questions about how things worked. Mom sounds amazing, Hannah said quietly, her eyes lingering on a photo of Abigail holding her as a baby. I wish I had more time with her. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. She would have been so proud of you, Hannah, he said softly. She loved you more than anything in the world. Hannah looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. I want to remember her, she whispered. I want to remember our life together. But I do not know how. Daniel reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. It is okay, he said. You do not have to remember everything right now. What matters is that we are here now. Together, we can make new memories. Hannah gave a small nod, though her expression was still filled with uncertainty. I am trying, she said quietly. But it is hard. I do not know how to just go back to being Hannah. You do not have to be the person you were, Daniel said gently. You are not just the girl you were when you were 7. You have grown up, you have had a life, and I do not expect you to erase any of that. You are still Emma too. But you are also Hannah. And whatever that means, we will figure it out together. Hannah looked at him, her eyes softening as she absorbed his words. For the first time since their reunion, she seemed to relax, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me. Daniel's chest tightened with emotion, and he reached out to take her hand. I never will, he promised. I spent 18 years searching for you, and now that I have found you, I am never letting go. For the rest of the evening, they continued to look through the photos, sharing stories, and slowly building a connection that had been lost for so long. It was tentative, fragile, but it was there. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of hope, a sense that maybe they could find their way back to each other. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Hannah fell into a new routine. It was not perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, moments when the weight of the past hung heavy between them. But there were also moments of connection, of shared laughter, of quiet understanding. Daniel made a point to show Hannah the places that had once been important to them, old family spots, her childhood home, and even the park where they used to play. Each visit brought new layers to their relationship, slowly bridging the gap between the past and the present. One afternoon, they visited the small cemetery where Abigail was buried. It was a quiet, serene place, shaded by tall trees. Daniel knelt by the gravestone, running his fingers over the engraved name. "She would have loved to see you again," he said softly. Hannah stood beside him, her eyes filled with sadness as she looked down at the grave. "I wish I could remember her," she whispered. "You do not need to remember everything to know that she loved you," Daniel said gently. "Her love for you was always there. And it is still here now." Hannah nodded, and for a moment they stood in silence, the weight of the past and present mingling in the air. In the weeks following their visit to the cemetery, Hannah and Daniel continued to build their relationship, layer by layer, memory by memory. There were still moments of tension, moments when Hannah's confusion about her past threatened to overwhelm her. But she was trying, really trying, to let herself believe that this was her new reality. That Daniel was truly her father, and that the life she had been living before was not the full picture of who she was. Daniel, on the other hand, felt both relief and guilt. He had found his daughter, the one he had spent years searching for, but the pain of all that had been lost, so many years, so many memories they could never get back, haunted him. He had to remind himself to be patient, to give Hannah the space she needed to come to terms with everything. But it was not easy. Every time he looked at her, he felt a pang of grief for the time they had missed together. One evening, they sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows across the room. Hannah was quiet, turning the pendant around in her fingers, a habit she had developed when she was deep in thought. "I have been thinking about Mom a lot lately," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked up, his heart heavy. "It is natural," he said gently. "She is a part of who you are, even if you do not remember everything." Hannah nodded slowly. "I wish I had more memories of her. I wish I could remember her voice, her laugh, anything." Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring into the flickering flames. "You were so young when she passed. I do not think anyone expects you to remember everything. But I can tell you about her, if you want." Hannah hesitated, then nodded. "I would like that." Daniel took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. She was incredible. Strong, kind, patient. She loved you more than anything in the world. When we found out she was pregnant with you, it was the happiest moment of our lives. We had been trying for years, and you were our miracle." Hannah smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "She sounds amazing." "She was," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "And she would have been so proud of you, of the woman you have become." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of Daniel's words lingering in the air. Hannah glanced at him, her brow furrowed slightly. Daniel swallowed hard, the familiar ache of loss settling in his chest. It was devastating. "I felt like my world had fallen apart. I did not know how to go on without her. But I had you. You were my reason to keep going." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she listened to him. "And then I disappeared." Daniel's heart ached at the sadness in her voice. "Yes, and when you were gone, it was like I had lost everything. I spent years searching for you, hoping, praying that one day I would find you." Hannah wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I am sorry." Daniel frowned, his heart breaking for her. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Hannah. None of this is your fault." "I know," she whispered. "But I feel like I have missed so much. I have missed you. I have missed Mom. I have missed my whole life." Daniel reached out, gently taking her hand. "We cannot change the past, but we have the future. We can make new memories." Hannah looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if I can never fully remember who I was?" Daniel squeezed her hand. "Then we will focus on who you are now. You do not have to be the girl you were. You are Hannah, but you are also Emma, and that is okay." Hannah nodded, her tears spilling over. I just wish I knew how to move forward. How to be both. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to take away her pain, to make everything right again, but he knew this was something she had to work through on her own. It will take time, he said softly. But you will get there. And I will be with you every step of the way. The next day, Daniel received a call from Paul. His voice was urgent, cutting through the quiet of Daniel's office like a knife. Daniel, we have got him. Daniel's heart raced. Hale? Yeah, we have located him, Paul confirmed. He has been hiding out in Miami using a fake identity, but we have enough evidence to bring him in. Daniel felt a surge of anger rise within him. David Hale, the man who had helped Claire orchestrate the disappearance of his daughter. The man who had played a part in ripping his family apart. Now he was finally within reach. What is the next step? Daniel asked, his voice tight. I have already contacted the authorities, Paul said. They are going to arrest him. After that, we will get the chance to talk to him and find out everything. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. I want to be there. You will be, Paul assured him. This is your chance to get closure, Daniel. We are almost there. After the call ended, Daniel sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had been searching for answers for so long. Now they were finally within his grasp. But as the reality of it set in, he could not shake the feeling of dread that lingered in his chest. What would Hale say? What more could be uncovered about the conspiracy that had torn his family apart? And what would this final revelation mean for Hannah? A few days later, Daniel and Paul met with law enforcement in Miami. The air was thick with tension as they waited for the arrest to go down. Daniel's heart pounded as he stood outside the small, run-down motel where Hale had been hiding. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. Minutes later they saw movement. Police officers moved in, and within moments, David Hale was in custody. Daniel's eyes locked on the man who had helped Claire destroy his life. Hale looked older, more disheveled than Daniel remembered, but there was still something cold and calculating in his eyes. As Hale was led toward the police car, his eyes met Daniel's. There was a flicker of recognition, but no remorse. Daniel's stomach turned as he realized that this man had never cared about the consequences of his actions. It had always been about money, power, and control. Paul approached Daniel, placing a hand on his shoulder. We will get our chance to talk to him. We will get the answers we need. Daniel nodded, though his heart felt heavy. He was not sure what he would say when they finally confronted Hale. But one thing was certain. He needed the truth. And he would not rest until he had it. That evening, back at the house, Daniel found Hannah sitting on the porch, staring out at the fading sunset. She looked so small, so fragile in that moment, and Daniel felt a deep sense of protectiveness wash over him. He sat down beside her, the cool evening breeze ruffling his hair. I have news, he said quietly. Hannah looked at him, her brow furrowed. What is it? They found David Hale, the man who helped Claire. He has been arrested. Hannah's face paled, and she looked away, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. What happens now? We will get to question him, Daniel said softly. We will finally get the full truth. Hannah was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Do you think knowing the full truth will make it any easier? Daniel sighed, unsure of how to answer. I do not know. But I think we need to know. Hannah nodded, though she did not look convinced. I am scared of what else we will find out. Daniel reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. No matter what we find out, we will face it together. Hannah gave a small nod, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I just hope it is finally over. Daniel sat in the dimly lit interrogation room, his heart pounding in his chest as he waited for David Hale to be brought in. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where everything would finally be laid bare. Across from him sat Paul, who had been instrumental in bringing Hale out of hiding. Daniel glanced at him, grateful for his unwavering support. But his mind was elsewhere. The door opened, and 2 officers escorted Hale into the room. He looked smaller than Daniel had imagined, disheveled and tired. But there was still an arrogance in his eyes, as if he believed he could talk his way out of whatever trouble he had found himself in. Hale sat down across from Daniel, the tension in the room thickening. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on Hale's. "You know why I am here?" Hale raised an eyebrow, a smirk forming on his lips. "I assume it is about your daughter. But honestly, I was just a facilitator. The mastermind was your wife." "Claire may have started this," Daniel said, his voice steady but filled with barely restrained anger. "But you helped her. You are just as responsible for what happened to Hannah." Daniel leaned forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "I want to know everything. Why you did it? How you kept it hidden for so long?" Hale leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "It was business, Mitchell. Claire wanted your daughter out of the picture because she was a threat. A threat to her influence over you, and more importantly, to the inheritance." Daniel's jaw tightened, his fists clenching under the table. "So you helped her disappear, my daughter. My 7-year-old daughter. So Claire could have control over me? Over my money?" Hale shrugged as if it were the simplest explanation in the world. "It was not just about money. It was about ensuring that Claire stayed in control. She knew you would never fully let go of Hannah or Abigail's memory. And she could not stand that. So she made a deal with me. I had the connections to make sure Hannah disappeared without a trace." Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, anger boiling beneath the surface. He had known the broad strokes of what had happened, but hearing it so coldly laid out in front of him, Hannah being treated like a pawn in Claire's twisted game, made it all feel even more monstrous. "And you never thought about the consequences?" Daniel's voice shook with rage. "The damage you caused?" Hale gave him a hard, emotionless look. "I was paid to do a job. I did it. What happened after that was not my problem." Daniel slammed his fist onto the table, causing Hale to flinch. "She is my daughter!" he roared. "You stole her life, her memories, her identity. You took everything from her and from me. You destroyed my family." Hale remained calm, though there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "I will not deny that. But you have your daughter back now, do you not? You found her." Daniel stared at him, his chest heaving with anger. 18 years, he said through gritted teeth. 18 years of not knowing where she was. 18 years of pain, of losing her childhood. You cannot fix that. Nothing can fix that. Hale's smirk faded, and he looked away, finally sensing the gravity of what he had done. But Daniel was not finished. "You are going to prison," he said coldly. "For a long time. And I will make sure you pay for every single day that I spent searching for my daughter." Hale did not respond. He simply stared at the table, his confidence finally eroding as the reality of his situation set in. Paul placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "That is enough," he said softly. "We have got what we need." Daniel stood up, his eyes never leaving Hale's. "You ruined my life," he said quietly. "But I am going to make sure you never ruin anyone else's." With that, Daniel turned and walked out of the room, his heart pounding with adrenaline and fury. He had the answers he had been searching for, but they did not bring the peace he had hoped for. Instead, they only deepened the sense of loss, the realization that no matter what, the years he had lost with Hannah were gone forever. Back at the house, Daniel found Hannah sitting in the garden, her face bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. She looked peaceful, yet there was a weight in her expression that mirrored his own. He sat down beside her, the silence between them comfortable yet charged with unspoken thoughts. "I heard you went to see him," Hannah said quietly, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the pendant around her neck. Daniel nodded, his voice heavy. "I needed to hear it from him. I needed to know why." Hannah did not say anything for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Did it help? Knowing the full truth?" Daniel sighed, leaning back against the bench. "I do not know. In some ways, yes, but it does not make anything easier. It does not change what happened. Hannah nodded, her eyes distant. I thought knowing the truth would give me closure. But now I just feel empty, like there is nothing left to hold on to. Daniel's chest tightened at the sadness in her voice. You have me, he said softly, and I have you. We have lost so much, but we still have each other. Hannah turned to look at him, her eyes filled with a deep, quiet pain. I want to move forward, Dad, she whispered, using the word dad for the first time since their reunion. But I do not know how. Hearing her call him dad for the first time filled Daniel with a mixture of joy and sorrow. He reached out, gently taking her hand. We will figure it out together, he said. There is no rush. We will take it one day at a time. Hannah gave a small nod, though her expression was still clouded with uncertainty. I just want to feel normal again, she admitted. But I do not know what normal is anymore. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. Normal does not mean going back to the way things were. It means finding a new way forward, and we will get there. They sat in silence for a while, the sun sinking lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the garden. It was not the happy ending Daniel had always dreamed of. There were still scars, still wounds that needed time to heal. But as he sat there with his daughter, hand in hand, he realized that this was enough. They had each other, and that was more than he had ever thought possible after all these years. Eventually, Hannah spoke again, her voice quiet but steady. I want to keep trying. I want to build new memories with you. Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with hope. We will. We will make new memories, starting right now. Hannah looked at him, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. It was not much, but it was a start. For the first time in years, Daniel felt a sense of peace. The road ahead would be difficult, but they were on it together, ready to face whatever came next. As the last rays of the sun disappeared behind the horizon, father and daughter sat together. The future stretched out before them, filled with the promise of new beginnings.